He was told he had just 2 years to live. His body was giving up, but his mind was about to change the universe forever. This is the true story of the man who beat time, defied death, and showed the world what it truly means to live. Oxford, England, 1942. In the middle of the World War II, as bombs fell over Europe and uncertainty filled the skies, a child was born, not into privilege, not into power, but into curiosity. His name, Stephen William Hawking. Even as a child, Stephen wasn't ordinary. He wasn't the strongest nor the loudest, but his eyes sparkled with questions. Why is the sky blue? Where did the stars come from? What is time? He would often sit for hours, staring at the night sky, lost in the constellations, while other children played with toys or fought over sweets. His classmates nicknamed him Einstein, half in jest, because his grades were average. But deep down, Stephen was not chasing marks. He was chasing meaning. His parents, intellectuals themselves, encouraged his curiosity. Books were everywhere. Dinner conversations were filled with debate, laughter, and theories. The family even used to eat in silence, each member with their nose buried in a book. But the road to greatness wasn't smooth. At school, he struggled, not because he wasn't smart, but because he was too smart for the system. He found classes boring. The traditional ways of learning didn't fit his way of thinking. He wasn't memorizing facts. He was connecting ideas, asking questions even his teachers couldn't answer. And then, one day, everything changed. Stephen earned a scholarship to Oxford University at the age of 17. Despite his young age and slender frame, he quickly became known, not for his brilliance at first, but for his wit, sarcasm, and love of classical music and rowing. Yes, Stephen Hawking was on the rowing team. But behind the laughs and clever jokes, something was wrong. He started stumbling, dropping things. He became unusually clumsy. Once, he fell down a flight of stairs without knowing how. His speech began to slur and his hands trembled when he tried to hold a pen. People thought he was lazy or tired. But Stephen knew it was something more. At the age of 21, just as he began his graduate studies at Cambridge, the truth came crashing down. He was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, a cruel, degenerative disease that attacks the nerves, shuts down the muscles, and eventually silences the body. Doctors gave him 2 years to live. 2 years. How would you live your life if you knew it would end in 2 years? Stephen fell into despair. The once curious mind, full of stars and theories, now saw only darkness. He avoided people. He stopped attending lectures. He thought, what's the point? But then, something unexpected happened. It wasn't a miracle cure or a scientific breakthrough that pulled Stephen back from the edge. It was love. He met a fellow student, Jane Wilde, a literature major with a gentle voice and fierce determination. She saw beyond the wheelchair, beyond the diagnosis. She saw the man, the mind, the dreamer. Jane gave Stephen something no medicine could, a reason to live. They got engaged soon after, and Stephen, now fueled by the urgency of time, threw himself into his studies. He began to dive deep into the mysteries of time, black holes, and the origins of the universe. He said, "Before my condition was diagnosed, I had been very bored with life, but the prospect of an early death made me realize life was worth living." He didn't just live. He exploded with thought. His body was weakening, but his mind was on fire. In the stillness of a wheelchair, he raced through the cosmos. He began working on radical theories about singularities, event horizons, and even the nature of time itself. He once said, "Although I cannot move and I have to speak through a computer, in my mind, I am free." As Stephen's body deteriorated, the irony of his life became almost poetic. The man, whose body was collapsing, was becoming the world's leading expert on how the universe began and how time might end. His biggest breakthrough came in the 1970s. At a time when scientists believed nothing could escape a black hole, Not even light. Stephen proposed something revolutionary. Black holes emit radiation. This radiation, now known as Hawking radiation, stunned the world of physics. Here was a man who couldn't lift a pencil, yet he was rewriting the laws of space. He worked tirelessly, typing equations with the tiny movement of one finger, clicking keys on a special device while his mind danced through galaxies. But life outside the lab was far from easy. ALS continued its cruel march. He lost his ability to speak completely. Doctors performed a tracheotomy to save his life after a severe bout of pneumonia. Now he would never speak naturally again. But this silence didn't stop Stephen Hawking. With the help of a computer and a speech-generating device, he learned to talk using just the movement of a cheek muscle. One by one, he would select words and the computer would speak them. That robotic voice, which became his signature, was more powerful than any microphone. With it, he lectured across the globe, inspired millions, and reminded the world, it's not what you can't do that defines you. It's what you choose to do anyway. In 1988, Stephen Hawking published a book. It wasn't meant to be a bestseller. In fact, his publisher warned him, no one wants to read a book about time and physics, especially not from a paralyzed scientist who speaks through a machine. But Stephen didn't listen. He had faith, not just in science, but in the curiosity of people. That book, A Brief History of Time, became an international phenomenon. It sold over 25 million copies and was translated into 40 languages. For weeks, it remained on the New York Times bestseller list. People, students, truck drivers, mothers, CEOs, were suddenly asking questions like, what was before the Big Bang? Could time run backward? Is there a God? He made cosmology, something once reserved for elite scientists, feel human, poetic, even spiritual. Through that book, Stephen Hawking did the impossible. He made the universe feel close. But behind the applause, awards, and fame, there was pain. His marriage to Jane began to crack under pressure. Raising 3 children, managing full-time care, and dealing with Stephen's growing celebrity strained the relationship. After 25 years of marriage, they separated. He later remarried his nurse, Elaine Mason, a relationship that drew controversy and concern. Some claimed emotional abuse, but Stephen denied all allegations. The public watched, often forgetting that inside the brilliant scientist was a vulnerable human being, longing for connection, independence, and peace. Yet he never stopped working. He appeared on TV shows like The Simpsons, Star Trek, and even The Big Bang Theory, where he played himself with humorous charm. His voice echoed in music albums. He inspired generations of young scientists, dreamers, and artists. When asked how he stayed positive, Stephen said, "My expectations were reduced to 0 when I was 21. Everything since then has been a bonus." Stephen Hawking defied every prediction. Instead of living 2 years, he lived more than 5 decades after diagnosis. He died in 2018 at the age of 76. But even in death, he left behind more than theories and books. He left behind a message to every person who feels small, broken, disabled, unseen, forgotten. However difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. Stephen Hawking didn't walk. He didn't run marathons. He didn't shout speeches from podiums. But his mind ran through the universe, touching places most of us can only dream of. He proved that limits are real, but so is the human spirit. Perfect. Let's continue the story and build toward that full 7,000-word count. Here's part 8 of your YouTube script on Stephen Hawking, expanding with cinematic, emotional, and deeply human storytelling. In the quiet corners of his home, away from the lecture halls and flashing cameras, Stephen Hawking was not just a physicist. He was a father. 3 children, Robert, Lucy, and Timothy, grew up seeing their father not as a man bound to a wheelchair, but as a giant of thought. Yet they also saw the struggle. Imagine a father who couldn't lift his child, couldn't run behind a bicycle, couldn't clap at school plays or tuck his kids into bed, and yet his presence was profound. Lucy would recall how Stephen used his speech device to tell bedtime stories, one word at a time, letting his children finish the sentences. He'd beam with pride when they asked questions about space and time. "Always question," he told them. "Even question me." As his fame grew, so did the distance between his scientific life and family life. Stephen wanted to give everything to both, but ALS forced him to choose his energy wisely. In interviews years later, his children shared their mixed emotions: pride, admiration, but also pain. "It wasn't easy," Lucy admitted, "but he showed us how to love in ways that don't require touch or voice." Stephen's science never blindly ignored faith. While he didn't believe in a personal God, he never dismissed the awe that surrounded existence. In his book, The Grand Design, he wrote, "Science does not eliminate God, it simply makes him unnecessary." But in private moments, when asked what lay beyond the universe, or what came before time, he would pause. Once a young student asked him, "Is there a heaven?" Stephen blinked slowly, then said, "Heaven is a fairy tale for people afraid of the dark. But science is the light." It was his version of the Bhagavad Gita's teaching. The soul is not born, and it does not die. It is eternal, indestructible. Though Stephen didn't speak in religious terms, his work echoed ancient wisdom. His belief in laws of nature, in balance, in cause and effect, paralleled the karmic philosophies that have guided civilizations for centuries. He didn't need to call it God, but he felt the same sacred reverence toward the cosmos that sages had felt toward the divine. In the 2000s, Hawking retracted one of his most famous theories. He had believed that information was lost in black holes, violating the laws of quantum mechanics. But after decades of debate and research, he admitted he was wrong. In a profession where ego often shields error, this was a moment of incredible humility. The world watched as the world's most brilliant man said, "I made a mistake." It takes greatness to be right, but it takes even more to admit you're not. When reporters asked why he changed his mind, Stephen smiled and replied, "Because that's what science is. It's not about being right, it's about getting closer to the truth." It was a spiritual lesson hidden in a scientific response, one that echoes Krishna's words in the Gita. A person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress, and is steady in both, becomes eligible for liberation. Stephen was not attached to pride. He was attached to truth. Public appearances became more exhausting. His health needed 24-hour support. But Stephen refused to stop. He delivered TED Talks using pre-written code. He collaborated on documentaries. He even worked on research papers up until 2 weeks before his death. At 76, after half a century of battling a disease that should have ended his life by 23, Stephen Hawking took his last breath in the very city where he had once studied the stars, Cambridge. His death sparked global mourning, but it also awakened something else: reflection. World leaders, astronauts, teachers, and even children lit candles and shared stories. They remembered a man who couldn't walk, but helped the world run toward the future. His ashes were buried between two other giants, Sir Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin, in Westminster Abbey. But even that stone floor could not contain his legacy. Let's pause for a moment, because this story is not just about Stephen Hawking. It's about you. If you're watching this, maybe you're going through something. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you've been told you can't. Maybe the world has handed you limitations: poverty, illness, heartbreak, or failure. But remember Stephen's words: intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. And, more importantly, look up at the stars, not down at your feet. We are not our circumstances. We are not the body. We are not our pain. We are not the voices that say we're not enough. We are the force that gets back up. We are the mind that refuses to be caged. We are, as the Bhagavad Gita says, the eternal spark within the body of perishable matter. And Stephen, he was that spark, shining through wires and machines, burning brighter than any limitation ever could. Absolutely. Let's continue your 7,000-word cinematic, emotional, and inspirational YouTube script on Stephen Hawking. Here's, as Stephen Hawking's health declined, something extraordinary happened. The world began listening, not just to his science but to his silence, to his presence. He became a guest star on The Simpsons, a cameo on Star Trek, and a humorous critic on The Big Bang Theory. But behind the laughs, there was something deeper, a reverence for resilience. In one episode, Stephen played himself, gently poking fun at his image. The audience laughed, but when the cameras stopped rolling, there was a silence, a realization that this man, unable to move a muscle, was moving minds across generations. He had become a symbol, not of disability, but of limitless potential. When the camera panned over his wheelchair, audiences didn't see metal and machinery. They saw a man who had rewritten the story of human ability. In 2014, a movie titled The Theory of Everything hit theaters. It told the story of Stephen Hawking and Jane Wilde, their love, their heartbreak, and their journey through impossible odds. The film was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. Eddie Redmayne, who portrayed Stephen, won the Oscar for Best Actor. When Redmayne accepted the award, he dedicated it to all of those battling ALS, and especially one extraordinary man, Stephen Hawking. For a moment, the world didn't just see science. It saw humanity. It saw love, sacrifice, determination, and, most of all, hope. Stephen watched the film and said, "At times, I thought it was me." And maybe that's the most powerful part of his story. It wasn't just a movie, it was a mirror. Despite being the world's most famous scientist, Stephen never lost his childlike wonder. He once said, "It would not be much of a universe if it wasn't home to the people you love." And though his marriage with Jane eventually ended, their bond remained. They raised children together, faced disease together, and stood side by side even after life had taken them in different directions. Later, he married Elaine Mason, one of his nurses. Their relationship was complex, passionate, and at times controversial. But it showed one thing clearly: Stephen never gave up on connection. He didn't just study black holes. He lived with emotional gravity every day and still chose to shine. Stephen gave his final public lecture in 2017. It was called The Beginning of Time. His voice, synthesized and slow, echoed through the hall. "We are all time travelers, journeying together into the future, but let us work together to make that future a place we want to visit." Let that sit for a second. A man who couldn't speak with his mouth. A man who hadn't walked since the Beatles were young. A man who lived with death pressing against his every breath, told the world to shape the future. That lecture wasn't science. It was scripture for the modern soul. On March 14, 2018, Pi Day, and also Albert Einstein's birthday, Stephen Hawking passed away. Poetic? Absolutely. As if the universe itself had waited for the perfect moment to take back one of its most brilliant minds. His funeral was held in Cambridge. Thousands lined the streets. His ashes were laid to rest beside Newton and Darwin. His voice was beamed into space, toward the closest black hole, accompanied by a message of peace. This is Professor Stephen Hawking. Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. He had spent his life studying the collapse of stars, but in the end, he became a star himself, a fixed light in the minds of millions, reminding us that the universe may be infinite, but so is the human will. You may be asking, why should I care? Because somewhere inside you, there's a voice that doubts. Maybe it's whispered that you're not smart enough, or strong enough, or young enough, or worthy enough. But here's the truth. You are the universe trying to understand itself. Stephen Hawking wasn't chosen. He was broken. And in the breaking, he found brilliance. If he could rise above paralysis, you can rise above rejection. If he could face death every day, you can face your fears. If he could smile through suffering, you can take one more step. So, what now? You've heard the story. You felt the weight of the chair, the pull of black holes, the push of courage. But none of it means anything unless it lives in you. Here's what you can do. 1. Honor your mind. Feed it with knowledge. Question everything. Never stop learning. 2. Embrace adversity. Let failure shape you, not break you. 3. Find your voice. Even if it's through a screen, a keyboard, or a whisper. Speak your truth. 4. Dream dangerously. Think bigger than your limitations. 5. Look up. Always. However difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. Stephen Hawking. And finally, if this story touched your heart, share it. Help someone else rise today. Like, subscribe, and comment below. Tell us which part of Hawking's journey inspired you most. Let's keep his legacy alive, not just in physics, but in every heart that dares to believe in the impossible.